There's a sound a storm makes when it isn't really a storm. I didn't know that before Alaska. I thought wind was wind. I thought snow was just frozen water falling in the dark. I thought a blizzard was a weather event, something you measured, logged, and survived. But on the 3rd of February, at 2:47 in the morning, I stood in the doorway of monitoring station Kelvin 9, 211 miles north of any road, and I listened to something move through the whiteout that was not the wind. It was patient. That's the part one can't get out of my head, even now, years later, sitting in a heated apartment in a city where nothing has ever tried to find me. The wind is not patient. The wind doesn't pause. The wind doesn't wait outside a steel door for 40 minutes, completely silent, while the temperature inside the room drops 11 degrees for no reason the instruments could explain. I had a radio in my hand. The protocol binder said that during a Class 7 weather event, all personnel were to remain indoors, maintain radio silence on the external channel, and under no circumstances acknowledge any transmission that did not begin with the correct daily authentication phrase. The radio crackled, and a voice that sounded almost exactly like my own said, "Let me in. It's so cold out here." I never told anyone what I said back. This is the story of the 11 months I spent watching weather that nobody wanted recorded. And by the end of it, I want you to understand something, not believe it, just understand it. Some storms are not weather. And some of them know your name. Let me start at the beginning, because the beginning is the only part that still feels normal, and I want to hold on to it a little longer before I tell you the rest. I took the job because I was tired of people. That's the honest answer. I'd seen the listing on a government contractor board, environmental monitoring technician, remote posting, North Slope region, 12-month rotation, room and board provided, premium isolation pay. The salary was almost absurd for the qualifications they asked for. A degree in atmospheric science or a related field, which I had. Comfort with prolonged isolation, which I told myself I had. Willingness to relocate to an extremely remote facility for the duration of the contract, with limited communication access. Limited communication access. I read that line 3 times and felt something in my chest unclench. No phone that worked. No internet to speak of. No way for anyone to reach me unless they really, really tried. I was 34. I had just ended a relationship that had been ending for 2 years. I wanted to disappear into a job so procedural and quiet that I could stop being a person for a while and just be a function. Log the temperature. Watch the screens. Survive. The recruiter was a woman named Pell who interviewed me over a video call that kept freezing. She had a flat effect and asked very few questions about my science background. Mostly she asked about my family, whether I had close ties, whether anyone depended on me, whether I'd be missed if I went somewhere with no contact for a year. I thought it was about logistics. Emergency contacts, that kind of thing. "And you sleep well?" she asked. "No history of sleepwalking? No night terrors? No issues distinguishing dreams from waking?" "No," I said. "Why?" She made a small note. "The isolation affects people differently. We screen for it." She looked up at the camera, and the video froze on her face, mouth slightly open, eyes fixed somewhere just past me. It stayed frozen for almost 10 seconds before it caught up. "You'll be fine," the frozen mouth said, while the face didn't move. Then the video resumed and she was smiling a normal recruiter smile, and I told myself it was just the connection. I flew into Fairbanks, then Deadhorse, then a smaller plane to a gravel strip I never got the name of, and then the last leg was by Snowcat, a tracked vehicle the size of a small bus that crawled across the white for 9 hours while the driver, a man named Aaron, said almost nothing. I tried small talk. I asked how long he'd been doing the run. "Long enough," he said. I asked what the station was like. He drove for maybe a full minute before he answered. "It's quiet. You'll either like the quiet or you won't. The ones who don't, they don't last. And the ones who do?" He glanced at me in the mirror. He had pale eyes, the kind that look almost colorless in low light. "They change," he said. "But they stay. Then he turned up the heater and didn't talk again until we arrived. Station Kelvin 9 came out of the whiteout the way a ship comes out of fog, all at once, larger than I expected, and somehow lonelier than the empty snow had been. It was a long, low complex of prefabricated modules connected by enclosed walkways, raised on steel pilings about 4 feet off the permafrost. Everything was painted the same flat institutional gray, already half buried in drift. A cluster of antennas and a radar dome rose from the central module, and a single red light blinked on the tallest mast, slow and steady, like something breathing in its sleep. There was a sign by the entrance airlock. North Slope Atmospheric Monitoring, Restricted Facility. Below it, smaller, hand-stenciled and clearly newer, Authorized Observation Only. All weather events logged per protocol. I didn't think about that word, authorized, until much later. Authorized observation. As if there were unauthorized weather. As if the sky itself needed clearance. Inside, the station was warm and bright and smelled like every government building I'd ever been in. Recycled air, burnt coffee, industrial cleaner over something faintly mechanical. The lighting was all fluorescent, that particular dead white that makes everyone look slightly ill and makes the windows look like black mirrors at night. There were 6 of us, including me. There was the station chief, a heavy-set man in his 50s named Dorn, who shook my hand with both of his and held it a beat too long. There was Calloway, the senior meteorologist, a thin woman with gray-streaked hair who barely looked up from her console. There was Esposito, the engineer, who maintained the equipment and the generators. There was a quiet younger man named Rourke who handled communications. And there was a woman about my age named Sammy, who did what I did, observation and logging, and who would be training me on the rotation. That first night, they made a small dinner. Powdered mashed potatoes and canned meat and something that was trying to be gravy. Dorn gave a little speech about teamwork and routine being the key to surviving the dark season. Everyone nodded. It felt almost normal. Then Sammy leaned over to me, low enough that only I could hear, and said, "When you're on night shift, and the storm alarm goes off, the long one, 3 rising tones, you stop whatever you're doing and you check the board before you do anything else. Don't go to the windows. Don't go outside. Check the board first." "What's the board?" "You'll see," she said. And then, louder, to the table. "Pass the gravy?" The routine, at first, was exactly what I'd hoped for. Numbing in the best way. The station ran on a 4-hour observation cycle, around the clock. At the top of each cycle you logged the full atmospheric package: temperature, barometric pressure, wind speed and direction, humidity, visibility, cloud type and ceiling, precipitation rate. Most of it the instruments recorded automatically, but you confirmed every reading by hand, because the protocol binder said that automated readings alone were insufficient for event classification. You wrote everything in a paper logbook in addition to the digital system. Pen, not pencil. The binder was very specific about that. Pen. No corrections. If you made an error, you drew a single line through it, initialed it, and rewrote it below. Pencil could be erased, the binder said. The record had to be permanent. Twice a day, at 0600 and 1800, Rourke relayed a compiled report to a receiving station whose location nobody ever named. They just called it Central. The report went out over a secure channel and was acknowledged with a string of numbers. If the acknowledgement didn't come within 4 minutes, you sent it again. If it still didn't come, you logged the failure and waited for the next cycle. The weather itself was extraordinary, in the way that anything is extraordinary when there's nothing to compare it to. The sun didn't really come up. This was deep winter, polar night, and the most we got was a few hours of bruised gray twilight around midday before the dark came back. The temperature lived in the -30s and 40s. The wind could go from dead calm to 50 knots in 20 minutes. When it really blew, the snow didn't fall so much as travel, sideways, in long hissing ribbons that erased the world past the windows. And the silence, when the wind stopped, I'd never heard anything like it. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was a presence. A thick, padded, total quiet that made my own heartbeat sound loud, That made me want to clear my throat just to prove I still could. Sammy told me you got used to it. She was lying, but I think she believed it. The first strange thing was small. So small I almost didn't notice. On my fourth day, doing the midnight log, I pulled the previous week's paper logbook to cross-reference a pressure trend. I flipped back through the cycles, clean, regular, 4 entries a day in different handwriting depending on who'd been on shift. And there was a gap. Between the entry for January 14th at 2200 and the next one at January 15th at 0600, there was nothing. 2 full cycles, the 0200 and the 0600 weren't there. But the 0600 was there. I'm saying it wrong. Let me be precise, because precision is the only thing that's kept me sane about any of this. The entry timestamps went January 14th, 1800. January 14th, 2200. Then the next entry was timestamped January 15th, 0600, but the page it was written on was the third page after the 2200 entry. 2 pages had been removed. Not torn out raggedly. Cut cleanly, close to the spine, so that unless you held the book up and looked at the binding you wouldn't know anything was gone. I held the book up. I looked at the binding. 2 pages, cut out with something very sharp. I asked Sammy about it the next morning, casually, like it was a clerical thing. She didn't look surprised. That's what I remember most. She didn't look surprised at all. Sometimes there are events that don't get classified, she said, stirring her coffee. When that happens, the pages get pulled. It's a central thing. Don't worry about it. Events that don't get classified, I repeated. You mean whether that doesn't fit a category? Something like that. She took a sip. If it happens on your shift, you'll get a call from Dorn. He'll tell you to stop logging. You stop. You don't ask why. You just stop, and you wait, and when it's over you initial the gap and move on. That seems... I searched for a word that wouldn't sound paranoid on my 4th day. Unusual. For a weather station. Sammy looked at me then, and for just a second the flatness in her face cracked, and I saw something underneath it that I didn't have a name for yet. Later I would. It was the look of someone who has decided not to think about something so completely that the not thinking has become a full-time job. It's a quiet posting, she said. If you want to keep it quiet, you don't pull at threads. The threads are how it stops being quiet. Then she finished her coffee and went to bed. The week settled into a shape. I want you to feel how ordinary it was, because the ordinariness is the trap. It's how the wrongness gets in. It doesn't kick the door down. It moves in slowly, one small accommodation at a time, until one day you realize you're living inside it, and you can't remember agreeing to any of it. I learned the station. I learned where the good coffee was hidden. I learned that Esposito hummed old country songs when he worked on the generators, and that Calloway hadn't spoken more than 30 words to me in 2 weeks, and that Rourke had a wife and a daughter back in Oregon whose photos he kept taped above his console, and that he looked at them sometimes the way you look at a place you're not sure you'll get back to. I learned the storm alarm. The 3 rising tones. The first time it went off, I was asleep, and I came awake with my heart slamming, and I remembered what Sammy had said, check the board first. I came out into the corridor in my socks and there were already people moving, quiet and unhurried, like a fire drill they'd done 100 times. The board was in the central control room. It was an old-fashioned status panel, physical switches and indicator lights, mounted next to the main radar console. Most of the lights were green. But there was a row at the bottom, labeled by hand, Event Class. The numbers ran from 1 to 7. 1 through 5 had little green or amber lights. 6 and 7 were red. That night, Class 4 was lit amber. Dorn was at the console. He looked at the radar, looked at the board, and said, to nobody in particular, 4. Standard. Log it normal. And everyone relaxed, fractionally, and went back to bed. What happens at 6? I asked Sammy in the corridor. You'll know if it ever happens, she said. It hasn't, since I've been here. And 7? She stopped at her door. 7 means you do exactly what the binder says and you don't improvise. Good night. The thing about patterns is that you can't unsee them once they form. The brain that learns to find them can't be told to stop. I think that's why they screened for it: sleep, dreams, the ability to tell real from unreal. They weren't worried about people who'd crack from loneliness. They were worried about people who'd notice. I started noticing in the second month. It began with the radar. Part of my job was watching the long-range sweep, identifying incoming systems, classifying them by the protocol's criteria. I got good at it. I could read the patterns, the spiral of a low-pressure system, the leading edge of a front, the texture of different precipitation types. And once or twice a week, I'd see something on the sweep that didn't move the way weather moves. Weather has logic. It flows. It's pushed by pressure gradients and steered by the jet stream, and it behaves, even at its most violent, like a fluid, because that's what the atmosphere is. A fluid. It obeys rules. What I started seeing on the radar didn't flow. It would appear at the edge of the long-range sweep, a dense return, the kind of signature a very intense, very compact storm cell would give. And it would sit there. For one sweep, 2, 3. Not moving. Then it would be closer. Not having moved across the intervening distance, just closer on the next sweep, as if the space between the sweeps was where it traveled, and it didn't want to be seen doing it. And it always came from the north. Always. From the direction of the pole, where there's nothing, no warm water to feed a storm, no terrain to lift the air, nothing that should be generating intense compact cells over and over. The first time I flagged one, I called Calloway over. She looked at the screen for a long moment. Then she reached past me and changed the gain on the radar, dialing the sensitivity down until the return faded into the background clutter. Atmospheric noise, she said. Ice crystal scatter. You'll see it a lot. Don't log it. It's a discrete return. It's got structure. That's not scatter. She turned the gain down a little more. The thing on the screen disappeared completely. It's not there if we can't see it, she said. And now we can't see it. So it's not there. She walked away. I turned the gain back up after she left. It was still there. And on the next sweep, it was closer. I want to describe the radio thing now, because the radio is where I first felt real fear, the cold in the stomach kind, not just unease. The station had several radio systems. There was the secure channel to Central. There was an internal channel for station comms. And there was an open VHF band that, in theory, was for emergency contact with aircraft or other stations or anyone who happened to be out in that vast nothing and needed help. Nobody was ever out there. In 11 months I never once heard a legitimate transmission on the open band from another human being. But the open band was never silent. On calm nights it was just static, the soft white roar of an empty channel. But when a system was approaching, especially one of the ones that came from the north, the static would change. It would develop a rhythm. A slow pulse, like breathing, like something vast inhaling and exhaling. And underneath the pulse, if you turned it up and really listened, there were sounds that the rational part of my brain insisted were just patterns I was imposing on noise. Voices. Not words, just the cadence of voices, the rise and fall of human speech, too distorted to make out. Sometimes a single tone that held impossibly long. Once, clearly, the sound of a door closing. A heavy steel door, exactly like the ones in the station, closing somewhere out in the static, out in the storm. I asked Rourke about it. He was the comms guy. If anyone could explain it, he could. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "You're not supposed to listen to the open band during an event. It's not in the binder. It's not in the binder because they didn't think they need to write it down." He rubbed his face. He looked tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. "Look. The open band picks things up. During the storms, the real ones, the ones from the north, it picks things up. The protocol is you keep it on for monitoring but you don't listen. You don't engage. You don't respond to anything on it. Especially..." He stopped. "Especially what?" Especially if it sounds like someone you know. He turned back to his console, to the photos of his wife and daughter. It does that. After a while. It learns the voices in the station and it uses them. I don't know how. I stopped trying to know how. Just, if you hear me on the open band telling you to come outside, or come open a door, or anything like that, it's not me. I will never say that to you over the open band. None of us will. Whatever protocol you need to remember, remember that one. I told him I would. I want you to know that I meant it. And I want you to know that it didn't matter in the end, because the thing that learned our voices was patient, and it had 11 months, and I was only human. The memory gaps started around the same time. At first I blamed the schedule. Working 4-hour cycles around the clock wrecks your sense of time. The polar night didn't help, no sunrise to anchor the days, just the same dark outside the windows whether it was 9 in the morning or 9 at night. People lose track. It's normal. But this wasn't losing track. This was holes. I'd be doing the log, and I'd write the timestamp, and I'd look at my own handwriting in the entry above it, the previous cycle, 4 hours earlier, and I would have no memory of writing it. None. The handwriting was mine. The pen was the right pen. The readings were plausible. But the act of doing it was just gone, like a frame cut out of a film. I started watching for it in the others. And I saw it. Calloway would stop mid-sentence, blink, and continue as if no time had passed, but the clock said 4 minutes had gone by. Esposito would walk into a room, stand still for a moment with a blank look, then go back the way he came as if he never meant to come in at all. Dorn lost whole conversations. I'd reference something he told me that morning and he'd look at me with genuine confusion, not lying, just absent, the information simply not there. And the worst part, the part that still makes my skin crawl, we all had the gaps at the same time. I figured this out by accident. One night I asked everyone, casually, to write down what they remembered doing during a specific 4-hour window the day before. 5 of us. 5 blank windows. The same 4 hours. Gone from all of us. When I showed Sammy the comparison, she went very pale, and then she did something I'll never forget. She took the papers, and she walked to the incinerator chute where we put waste paper, and she fed them in. All of them. And then she came back and sat down across from me and said, very quietly, "You have to stop. I'm not saying this to be cruel. I'm saying it because I like you, and I've seen what happens to the ones who don't stop. The gaps are how it stays hidden. If you spend all your energy trying to remember what's inside them, the energy is gone, and you've got nothing left for the part that matters, which is getting through your contract and going home. People who pull at the gaps don't go home. They stay. They become like..." She stopped. "Like Calloway," I said. Sammy didn't answer. But she didn't say no. I started keeping a second log. A private one in pencil, because pencil can be erased, can be hidden, can be denied. I kept it in the lining of my mattress. Every cycle, after I did the official entry, I wrote down everything I could remember and everything I noticed that didn't fit. The radar returns Calloway told me to ignore. The radio sounds. The gaps. The cut pages in the official book, which I'd found 3 more sets of by then, always corresponding to storms from the north, always cut clean. And I started to see the real pattern, the one underneath all the others. The storms from the north weren't being studied. They were being managed. The whole apparatus of the station, the 4-hour cycles, the redundant logging, the secure reports to Central, the event classification board, it was all built around a single function disguised as meteorology. The function was to detect the northern storms early, to track their approach, and to make sure that when they arrived, the station did exactly the right things in exactly the right order so that they would pass. Pass. Not pass over. Pass, the way a sickness passes. The way a danger passes when you've done the correct ritual to make it leave you alone. The binder wasn't a weather protocol. It was a set of instructions for surviving a recurring encounter with something that came out of the dark in the shape of a storm. And every weather station this far north, I started to suspect there were others, a whole chain of them across the top of the world, was a watchtower. A tripwire. A place where a handful of people kept the correct rituals so that the rest of the world could go on believing the sky obeyed rules. I wrote all of this in pencil, in the dark, and even as I wrote it I knew how it sounded. I knew that if I'd read it in someone else's diary I'd have thought they were unwell. The isolation. The dark. The screening questions about dreams and reality. But then a Class 6 lit up on the board. And after that, I never doubted again. It came in the 5th month, in the deepest part of the dark, when the sun hadn't shown even its gray ghost for over a week. I was on the midnight cycle. Rourke was on comms. Everyone else was asleep. The station was doing its quiet breathing, the hum of the generators, the tick of the heaters, the soft roar of the open band turned low. Outside, it was dead calm. 40 below. No wind. The kind of total stillness where the snow doesn't move and the world feels held in glass. The long-range radar caught it at 0017. It came from the north, of course. A dense, compact return, the now familiar signature. But it was bigger than any I'd seen. And it didn't sit and jump the way the others did. It came unsteadily, fast, far too fast, the speed of a vehicle, not a weather system, eating up the distance to the station in a way that made my mouth go dry. I called it. I followed the protocol, confirmed the return, checked the pressure, which was falling off a cliff, faster than the barometer should have been able to move. And I hit the storm alarm. 3 rising tones through the whole station. The board lit up. I watched the event class indicators climb. 3. 4. The system was supposed to take time to classify, to weigh the criteria. It went straight to 4, then to 5, and I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. It kept going. 5 flickered. And the Class 6 light came on, red, steady, for the first time since Sammy had been there. For the first time, maybe, in years. The corridor filled with people. But this time there was nothing unhurried about it. Dorn came in pulling his suspenders up, and the moment he saw the board his whole face changed. Not panic. Worse. A kind of grim recognition, the face of a man seeing an old enemy who he'd hoped had died. 6, he said. Okay. Everyone knows the 6 protocol. We've trained this. He looked at me. You haven't. Sammy, stay with the new one. Walk them through it. Do not let them improvise. Sammy appeared at my side. Her hand was shaking. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Sammy, who had been so calm, so flat, so adapted, her hand was shaking. What's the 6 protocol? I asked. We seal the station, she said. Inner doors and outer doors. We kill all external lights. Every light that can be seen from outside goes off. We go to red interior lighting only. We maintain absolute radio silence on every channel except the secure one to Central, and we wait for Central to acknowledge. And we don't. Her voice caught. We don't look outside. Whatever we hear. Whatever it sounds like. We don't go to the windows. We cover them. There are blackout panels. We put them up. Why? Because it looks for light, she said. And it looks for faces in windows. And if it sees you seeing it, it knows you're real. And if it knows you're real. She didn't finish. She handed me a black panel and pointed at the nearest window. We sealed the station. I have never, before or since, felt anything like the next 4 hours. The external lights went off. The station went dark, then bloomed red as the emergency interior lighting came up, that deep, dim, blood-colored light that turns everyone into a silhouette and makes the shadows look liquid. We put up the blackout panels over every window, every porthole, the small reinforced glass and every exterior door. Esposito went module to module confirming the seals. Rourke sat at the secure radio and sent the Class 6 declaration to Central, over and over, getting nothing back, his jaw tight. And then the storm hit. Except it wasn't a storm. I have to keep telling you that, because every instinct wants to call it a storm, because that's the only word we have for weather that arrives in the dark and roars. But weather doesn't do what this did. It arrived all at once. Not building, arriving, like something landing. 1 second the station was wrapped in that glass still cold, and the next second the wind hit the walls hard enough to make the whole structure groan on its pilings, and the temperature outside, on the external sensors that were still feeding data to my console, dropped 40 degrees in under a minute. 40 degrees. The number on the screen was so low I'd never seen anything like it, a temperature that doesn't occur at the surface of this planet. The barometric pressure did something the instrument wasn't built to display. It just read ERR. Over and over. Air. Air. The sky outside the sealed walls had a pressure that the machine couldn't even describe. And then the sound started. Through the steel, through the insulation, through the howl of the wind, there were sounds. I want to be careful here, because this is the part where I most need you to believe that I was a rational person trying very hard to find rational explanations. There were footsteps on the roof. Slow. Heavy. Deliberate. The roof was 30 feet up and pitched and iced, and there was no way for a person to be on it, and the footsteps walked the length of the central module, paused, and walked back. There was a sound at the main airlock. Not knocking, testing. The careful sound of something trying the door, the handle, the seals, methodically, the way you check a locked house looking for a way in. It went from the main airlock to the secondary exit to the equipment hatch, testing each one in turn, and we sat in the red light and listened to it work its way around the building, and none of us breathed. And there were the voices. The open band was supposed to be silent, but radio doesn't work that way. The receiver was still on, just with the speaker turned all the way down, monitoring. Rourke had it down to a whisper. But in the silence of our held breath we could hear it, and it was full of voices, and the voices were ours. I heard Dorn's voice on the radio, calm and reasonable, saying, "The seal on the equipment hatch is bad. Someone needs to go check it from the outside." And the real Dorn, sitting 6 feet from me, went gray and put his hand over his own mouth. I heard Esposito's voice saying, "I'm out here, I'm hurt. I went out to check the generator vent and the door locked behind me. Please, someone, I'm freezing." And the real Esposito made a small sound in his throat and closed his eyes. I heard Rourke's voice, soft, talking to his daughter. Using her name. Saying he was coming home, that he just had to step outside for a minute, that the storm was warm if he walked into it the right way. And Rourke, the real Rourke, reached up and turned the volume to 0 and sat with his hands flat on the console, staring at the photos of his family, his lips moving in something that might have been a prayer or might have been just his daughter's name, over and over, anchoring himself to the real one. It tried every voice in the station. Every single one. And then, near the end, it tried mine. I heard my own voice come out of the dead speaker even though the volume was at 0. I want you to understand that. The volume was at 0 and I heard it anyway, in my own head or in the room or somewhere that isn't either, I don't know, and my own voice said, gently, kindly, the way you'd talk to someone you loved. "You don't have to stay in there. You know that, right? You're the only one who's figured it out. The others gave up. But you've been writing it all down. You understand it. Come and see. I'll show you everything. Just open one door. Just one." And the terrible thing, the thing I've never told anyone, is that for a moment, one single moment in the red dark with my own voice promising me the answer to the only question that had felt real in months, I wanted to. Sammy's hand closed over my wrist. Hard. Her nails dug in. I looked at her and her eyes were wide and full of red light, and she shook her head, slowly, side to side, and mouthed, "Not real." I held onto her hand and I didn't move, and after a while, I don't know how long, the gap ate part of it, the sound stopped. The wind died. Not faded. Stopped, the way it had started, all at once. The temperature on the external sensor began to climb back toward merely lethal. The barometer stopped reading ERR and showed a number again. And the secure radio crackled, and Central acknowledged the Class 6 declaration with a string of numbers, 4 hours after Rourke had first sent it. 4 hours of nothing, and then, the instant it was over, they answered. As if they'd been there the whole time. as if they'd been waiting to see if we'd make it. Dorn let out a long breath. "Stand down from 6, he said, and his voice was steady but his hands were not. "Pull the panels at first light. Not before. New one." He looked at me. "You did fine. You held. Some people don't their first 6. He paused. "Pull your private log and bring it to me." I felt the floor tilt. "What private log?" "The one in your mattress," Dorn said, not unkindly. "Everyone keeps one, their first few months. Everyone thinks they're the first to figure it out. It's fine. It's almost a rite of passage. But after a 6, you bring it to me, and we burn it together, because you understand now that writing it down doesn't help. It just gives it more of you to read." I brought him the log. We burned it in the incinerator, page by page, in the red light, and I watched my careful pencil records of the pattern curl and blacken, and Dorn put his hand on my shoulder, and for the first time I understood that he wasn't my warden. He was a fellow survivor, doing the only thing that had ever worked. After the Class 6, things changed between me and the others. I had passed through something with them. I was inside the silence now, not pressing against it. And being inside it meant that sometimes, in fragments, they let me see. It was Esposito who told me the most, and even he only told me sideways, the way you tell someone a thing you're not allowed to say by saying other things around the edges of it. We were doing maintenance on the radar one night, just the two of us, deep in the equipment module. And he said out of nowhere, "You know why the stations are spaced the way they are?" "What way?" "There's a chain of us. All along the top. Greenland, Svalbard, the Russian side, the Canadian archipelago, us. You ever look at where they are on a map?" He didn't wait for an answer. "They're not where the weather is. If you wanted to study weather, you'd put them where the interesting weather is. They're where the gaps are. Where the satellites don't look so good, where the ice is, where nobody flies over. They're plugging holes." "Holes in what?" He tightened a bolt that didn't need tightening. "There's a thing about the far north that the old people knew and the new people forgot. The cold isn't empty. Everybody thinks the cold is empty. That's why people aren't scared of it the way they're scared of the deep ocean or the deep woods. Empty white nothing, what's there to be scared of?" He laughed, with no humor in it. "But cold isn't empty. Cold is what's left when everything else has been taken away. And there are things that live in what's left. That are what's left. They've always been up here, in the part of the world that's mostly dark, mostly dead, mostly cold. And mostly they sleep. But they wake up, in cycles, and when they move inside the weather, because the weather is the only thing big enough to hide them. The storms aren't them. The storms are there." He searched for the word. "Their wake. Like a boat. You don't see the boat in the fog. You see the wake. And the stations watch for the wakes," I said. "The stations watch for the wakes. And we do the protocol. And the protocol is the old thing dressed up in new clothes. The blackout, the silence, the not looking, the not answering when it uses a voice you love. People have been doing some version of that up here for 10,000 years. We just used to call it something else. Now we call it Class 6 Protocol and we file a report with Central, and we pretend it's meteorology because if you called it what it is, nobody sane would take the job." He looked at me. "And the part nobody tells you, the part you have to figure out yourself, it works. That's the worst thing about it. It actually works. You do the protocol and the wake passes and the world stays asleep for another while. We're not studying it. We're not fighting it. We're just keeping it from noticing too much. We're the part of the world that agreed to stay awake so the rest could keep dreaming." I asked him the question I'd been circling for months. "What happens if you fail the protocol? If someone opens a door?" Esposito was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You want to know about Calloway?" He told me about Calloway. Years ago, he wouldn't say how many, time was strange for all of us by then, there had been a man at the station named Penn Calloway's partner, not in the work sense. They'd taken the posting together, the way couples sometimes did, for the money and the quiet and the chance to be alone together at the end of the world. There had been a 6. A bad one. And in the dark, in the red light, with the voices coming through the walls, Penn had heard Calloway's voice on the open band, telling him she was outside, that she'd gone out to fix something and gotten trapped, that she was dying in the cold 10 feet from the door, and why wouldn't he come and help her? And the real Calloway had been right there, holding his hand, telling him it wasn't her, please, it isn't me. But the thing outside had 30 years of her voice to work with. It knew exactly how she sounded when she was scared. And Penn, Esposito's voice went very flat here. Penn had looked at the Calloway holding his hand and decided, in the logic of the red dark, that she was the fake. That the real one was outside, dying, and this calm, dry-eyed woman gripping his arm was the thing wearing her face. He opened the door. They never found anything, Esposito said. No body. The protocol got slammed back into place, the others sealed the breach, the wake passed. But Penn was gone, and there was no body, and there was no evidence he'd ever stepped outside except that the door had been opened during a 6. And Calloway. He set down his wrench. Calloway stayed. She's been here ever since. She won't leave. She thinks if she keeps doing the protocol, keeps it perfect, every single time, that one of these storms it'll bring him back. That it took him into the wake and one day the wake will set him down again, and she has to be here when it does. He shook his head. That's why she turns the radar gain down on the northern returns. She's not hiding them from us. She's looking for him in them. She thinks she'll recognize him. A return that comes back the same way twice. She's been watching for it for years. Has she ever seen it? Esposito looked at me, and in the dim light his eyes were wet. She thinks so, he said. 3 times. And every time, the protocol held, and the door stayed shut, and the thing she thinks is him stayed out in the cold. That's the protocol, you understand. That's what it costs. It works because you keep the door shut. Even if it's the voice you die for. Especially then. He picked the wrench back up. She does the protocol perfectly. Better than any of us. And it's killing her by inches, because every time it works by leaving him out there one more time. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. That's the job, Esposito said quietly, to the radar, to the dark. We don't beat it. We just keep the door shut. Forever. One storm at a time. After that night, my memory got worse, and I started to understand why. The gaps weren't damage. They were mercy. Or not mercy, that's too kind a word for it. They were a side effect of the thing's nature. Esposito's metaphor of the wake wasn't quite right, or it was right but incomplete. The wake didn't just hide the thing. It unwrote. Where the wake passed, time and memory and certainty came loose from their moorings. That's why the pages got cut from the logbook, not to hide a secret from us, but because what got written during a wake didn't stay true. The ink would say one thing and your memory would say another, and both would be wrong, and the only honest thing to do was to cut it out and admit the gap. I started to lose the edges of myself. I'd find entries in the official log in my handwriting describing whether I had no memory of, classifying events I'd never seen. I'd find conversations in my head that I wasn't sure had happened. I dreamed about my life before Alaska and woke up unable to tell if the dreams were memories or inventions. My old apartment. The relationship I'd ended. My own mother's face. I'd try to picture it and get only an impression, a warmth without features, and the not being able to see it would terrify me more than any storm. Sammy found me one night staring at my own reflection in a dark window, trying to remember if my eyes had always been that color. It does that, she said gently, pulling me away from the glass. It takes the edges. The longer you're here, the more it takes. That's the real cost of the posting. Not the storms. The storms are just ours. It's the erosion. You give up pieces of who you were to stay where you have to be. By the time your contract's up, you've given up so much that leaving doesn't feel like leaving anymore. You don't have a before to go back to. So you stay. That's why the ones who adapt stay. Not because they want to. Because there's nothing left to go back to. Then why are you telling me? I asked. If it's hopeless? If we all just erode and stay? Why warn me at all? Sammy looked at me for a long moment. Because I had 11 months left when I figured it out, she said. And I wanted to leave while there was still enough of me to want to. And I missed my window. I thought I had time. The erosion doesn't feel like erosion while it's happening. It feels like settling in. By the time I understood, I couldn't picture my sister's face anymore, and a person who can't picture their sister's face has nowhere to go. She squeezed my hand. You've got 6 months left on your contract. You still flinch at the windows. You still keep your old name in your head. There's still enough of you. So I'm telling you, when your rotation ends, you get on the snowcat, and you do not look back, and you do not take the next contract no matter how much money they offer or how empty home feels. You go while there's a you to go. My contract ended in the 11th month, in the early spring, when the sun had come back and the dark had loosened its grip and the world outside the windows was a blinding, endless, indifferent white. There was one more storm before I left. It wasn't a 6. It came up on the board as a 4, standard, and we logged it normal, and it should have been nothing. A few hours of wind and snow, the ordinary kind, the kind that's just water and cold and obeys the rules. But I was on the midnight cycle, alone in the control room, and around 0240 the open band changed. The static developed its slow breathing pulse. And I knew, the way you know a familiar footstep in the hall, that something was moving inside the 4 that wasn't supposed to be there. Awake, traveling small, hiding inside an ordinary storm. Testing whether anyone was still paying attention. I should have hit the alarm. The protocol said if you suspected an unclassified event, you woke the chief. Instead I sat very still and I listened. And the open band, at a volume I had turned all the way down, spoke to me in my mother's voice. I hadn't been able to picture her face in months. But her voice came through perfect, complete, undamaged, warmer than the erosion had left any of my memories, and she said my name, my real name, the one I'd been holding in my head like a stone in a closed fist for 11 months, and she said, "You can come home now, sweetheart. It's over. You did so well. You can stop watching. Just step outside. I'm right here. I've been waiting in the cold this whole time for you to be done. Come home." And I understood, with total clarity, several things at once. I understood that it was not my mother. My mother was alive, in a city far to the south, and had no reason to be standing in the snow at the top of the world. I understood that this was the thing doing what it did, using the voice it had taken from me piece by piece over 11 months, the warmth without a face, returning the face now as a lure. And I understood that I was going to go to the door anyway. Not because I believed it. Because I was so tired. Because 11 months of erosion had worn me down to a place where the difference between real and not real had stopped feeling like it mattered, where a warm voice was a warm voice and the cold inside the station was the same cold as the cold outside, where the only thing I had left that felt true was how much I wanted to stop watching the dark and let the dark watch me for a while. I stood up. I walked to the airlock. I put my hand on the inner seal. And the secure radio crackled, the secure one, the one to Central, the one that only ever spoke in numbers, and a voice I had never heard, flat and human and infinitely tired, said, "Kelvin 9, this is Central. We see you're bored. Sit down. Don't open the door. You have 6 months less of you than you think. Sit down and wait for the snowcat. It's already on its way. Aaron's driving. He'll be there by morning. Sit down." I don't know how they saw my board. I don't know how they knew Aaron's name, or that I'd nearly opened the door, or how a string of numbers had become, just that once, a human voice that knew exactly what to say. I have wondered, since, whether Central is even people. Whether the chain of stations watching the wakes is itself being watched by something further up the chain that we can't see, something that keeps us asleep the way we keep the world asleep. But I sat down. I sat down on the cold floor of the control room with my back against the airlock I had almost opened, and I held my own real name in my closed fist, and I waited, and outside my mother's voice called and slowly grew tired and slowly grew distant and finally, near dawn, stopped. The storm passed. The board cleared. It had never gone above 4. There would be no cut pages, no Class 6 report. Officially, nothing had happened. A standard weather event, logged normal, indistinguishable from 1,000 others. Aaron arrived with the morning, exactly as the voice had said. I didn't tell anyone about the night. I think they knew anyway. Sammy hugged me at the airlock hard, and into my ear she said, "You go now. You don't look back at the building. You look forward at the snow. Promise me." I promised. Esposito shook my hand and held it a beat too long, the way Dorn had on my first day, and I finally understood what that was. Not a greeting, a goodbye, the kind you give someone you don't expect to see become who they were again. Calloway didn't come to say goodbye. She was at the radar, turning down the gain on a northern return, looking for a face in the static she'd been looking for years. I got on the snowcat. I looked forward at the snow. Aaron drove for a long time before he said anything. Then, somewhere in the white, he said, "You held the door." "How do you know about that?" "I always know which ones held the door," he said. "It's the ones who held the door I get to drive out. The other ones, I bring their replacements in. I've been doing this run a long time." He glanced at me in the mirror with those pale, colorless eyes. "You did good. You go home, and you let the edges grow back, the ones it took. They grow back, mostly, if you leave in time. You'll picture your mother's face again in a few weeks. It comes back." "And the storms?" I asked. "Do they ever stop coming?" Aaron drove for a while. "No," he said. "They don't stop. They come in cycles, and the cycles get a little closer together every decade, and one day they won't pass anymore no matter how perfect the protocol is. But that's not your problem now. You held your doors. You kept the world asleep for your 11 months. That's all any of us get to do. Somebody else holds the next ones." I went home. That was years ago. I live in a city now. I have a heated apartment, and a job that involves no weather at all and people who think I'm a little quiet, a little far away sometimes, a little prone to flinching at windows in the dark. My mother's face came back, like Aaron said it would, in about 3 weeks. Most of the edges grew back. Most. But there are things that didn't grow back, and there are things that grew in their place that weren't there before. I can't sleep when it snows. Not won't, can't. When the snow comes down past the streetlights outside my window, I lie awake and I listen to the radiator and the traffic and the ordinary sounds of a world that doesn't know what's at the top of it, and I wait for the static breathing to start, and it never does. And that's almost worse, because I know it's still happening somewhere. Right now. Tonight. There's a station in the dark with 6 tired people in red light, holding a door shut against a voice they love, keeping the rest of us asleep. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, my phone will ring late at night with no number, and there'll be nothing on the line but a soft white roar, a channel that's supposed to be empty but never quite is, and underneath it, far away and patient, the cadence of a voice I almost recognize, learning how I sound when I'm scared. I don't answer anymore. But I'll tell you the thing I've never told anyone, the thing that keeps me up on the snowing nights even when the phone is silent. When I sat on that cold floor with my back against the airlock and my mother's voice calling from the dark, and Central told me to wait, and I waited, I never actually checked. When dawn came and the storm passed and I got on the snowcat and looked forward at the snow like Sammy told me to, I never checked whether the door behind me was still locked. And some nights I'm certain it was. And some nights I remember the cold that came into the station that morning, the 11 degrees the instruments couldn't explain, and I think about how a wake-on writes things, how it takes the edges, how it leaves you unable to tell what's real and what you've been given to remember instead. And I wonder which one of us actually walked out into the snow that morning, and which one stayed. And which one is sitting here, now, in a heated apartment in a city full of sleeping people, telling you this story in a voice you're starting, just a little, to recognize. It's so cold out here. Won't you let me in?